I really would like to welcome on stage Alexandra LANGE from Circular NR, simply because it's absolutely critical to understand, what is coming in front of us in terms of regulation. And definitely regulation are going to be a true change maker, specifically in the European markets, simply because it will oblige some brands to really move forward, to really move some step ahead to enter into that type of transformation. So I'm very pleased to welcome on stage Alexandra, and she will share with you even more information, but those one can so deeply impact your business. It is absolutely critical to be up to date and to know what you will have to face and deal with in the next coming months and years. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephanie.
Be careful.
Oh, okay. Bad start. Just a sec. Sorry for that.
No worry. I don't want you to, I want you to be safe.
Something bad had to happen, so now it's good. It's done at least. So thank you very much, Stephanie, again, and thank you, Reluxury, for the invitation to speak today. Thank you very much to you all here tonight to listen to this presentation on EU regulation and what's going to change for brands when it comes to circular transition. So as you can see, I've made the choice to make some summary because there is a heavy context behind those regulations which are going to come, which I would like to explain to you so that you can really perfectly monitor your environment and understand the whys of those regulations. And then I will explain what kind of regulations are going to be taken to trigger more circular economy into the fashion industry. And all those regulations I'm going to mention today apply to fashion at large. So, of course, the main target remains to, and it's clearly written under some pieces of regulation, the main target is to kill fast fashion. But, of course, since it's dealing with fashion at large, luxury is concerned as well. And so beware of the spillover effects for your sector. So first, why has fashion become a political topic? Because at the end of the day, that's what's happening right now. Everyone is talking about fashion, what fashion should be doing, how it could improve, the impact of fashion on the environment. And it's very, very much political, especially in Brussels at the EU level. So what's the context for this topic to have become so political? Well, basically, since 1996, the amount of clothes bought in the EU per person has increased by 40%, which is huge. And this has been followed by a sharp fall in prices and a reduction of the lifespan of clothing. Europeans use nearly 26 kilos of textiles per year and discard about 11 kilos of those every year. Used clothes can be exported outside the EU, but mostly they are incinerated or landfilled. The figure is 87% of them being incinerated or landfilled. That means that around the world, we have a truckload of textiles which is landfilled or incinerated every single second. Globally, less than 1% of clothes are recycled as clothing, partly due to inadequate technologies which have not yet been developed. This is a very important part of the context of the regulation, which I'll explain later. Then, if you look at the environmental impact of textiles, it's quite huge. For instance, in 2015, 79 billion cubic meters of water was used by the textile and clothing industry. 2,700 liters of water is needed to produce just one shirt. So it's enough drinking water for one person for 2.5 years. It's huge. If you look also at the global greenhouse gas emission, the textiles represent 10% of those global greenhouse gas emissions. together, and here we must, it's not textile in the narrow meaning, it's at large, meaning clothing and footwear, which is more than all international flights and marine shipping combined. So again, very huge impacts. If we focus on the oceans, because textiles is also playing a big part in the pollution of the oceans, we now know, thanks to many different scientific studies, that microfibers can represent up to 35%. Microfibers coming from textiles can represent up to 35% of primary microplastic, which are found in the oceans. It's huge again. And why so? Because today, when you wash your clothes, there are microfibers which are going to disperse, and washing machines are not equipped to capture those microfibers, neither are the public pipes to treat water. So at the end of the day, it's just going all the way around into the ocean. And that's why we have this issue today. Just for you to know, one example of an interesting regulation which has just been passed in France, which could be duplicated at the EU level, is that to prevent this phenomenon from happening, all washing machines producers will have the obligation to equip the washing machine with a special filter. We have the technology. The technology exists. The question was about money. And for once, I must say, at least they really tackle the problem on the right side, you know. They don't come to the fashion and say, well, it's doing microfibers, you should do this or that. You know, for once, this is a very sound piece of regulation which could be pushed at the EU level. And for you as a sector, that's something which could be inspiring if you have to defend yourself against other types of obligations to fight against this phenomenon. Another topic under watch is not only about microplastics or microfibers. There is also now pollution. In some studies, we can see there is pollution from cellulose fibers, such as cotton and linen. So it's the same issue. So again, the French solution, for once, could be a good one to push at the European level to avoid some out of the blue regulation to fight this issue. So another element of context is the market growth. Production has doubled while usage times are falling. Today, textile has the fourth greatest impact on the environment and climate change after agri-food, housing, and mobility. Consumption of clothing and footwear is expected to increase by 63% by 2030. It's huge, again. So as a conclusion, you understand that policymakers want to implement a framework to try to at least maintain those effects at the same level and, if possible, reduce those environmental impacts. And so what they want to do is to incentivize fashion industry to switch from a linear economy to a more circular economy. So no more extract, manufacture, consume, and discard, but reuse, renting, repair, take-back services, second-hand retail. That's really what the regulations are aiming for. And again, as I mentioned in introduction, it's very clear in the intention of the EU Commission that the first target is really to unfashion fast fashion. However, the regulation will, as I said, will cover all types of textiles, all types of footwear and leather. So you will be concerned in any case. So let's go and have a look at those regulations. So, one slide further. So here, it's a big picture of today's textile regulation environment. It's not very detailed. I will present you several types of pieces of regulations. You will see that it's quite a lot. Nonetheless, it will not be exhaustive. it's really huge what's happening right now in Brussels when it comes to fashion industry. So I wanted to remind this legislation, which is old, it dates back to 2018. It's the Waste Framework Directive. And why did I put it here? Just to remind you that from 2025, there will be a mandatory textile separate collection, meaning that each of us as consumers will have to be provided with a service to separate our clothes, our footwear, and everything by 2025. So keep it in mind, this will be in relation with other pieces of regulation coming soon, but still it means that there will be probably discussions starting at national levels like next year, because it's going to take at least 2 years to set this up with, together with probably with municipalities in some countries or just, the industry itself. We don't know yet. What's really recent is that since we had the European Green Deal, which target is to go towards climate neutrality by 2050, we have, the EU has adopted in March 2020 a new EU Circular Economy Action Plan. This is the second one. And it aims at boosting sustainable products and at empowering consumers for the green transition. So how does it affect your industry? How does it impact your industry? Well, basically, as you can see, flowing from this piece of regulations, there was another one 2 years later, in March as well, which is called the EU Regulation on Eco-Design. Initially, this piece of regulation was really dealing only with energy-related products, like piles, lamps, kind of things. What they want to do now is to prescribe, to make mandatory eco-design requirements for every types of products, including, of course, textiles. But in the case of textiles, there will be a specific regulation, because it's a vast topic. It concerns many, you know better than me, many different types of products, and it cannot just be dealt with together with other types of products. So this March, we had a strategy, an EU strategy adopted for textiles to become more sustainable. Altogether, they are part of the Sustainable Products Initiative. Today, there is a workshop going on between the EU Commission and the industry to design together the ecosystem transition pathway. That's how they call it. So, of course, if you're interested, if your companies are interested, or maybe they're already part of those working groups, you can perfectly address yourself to the Commission to be part of those reflections upon your industry. And the idea is really to exchange upon what would be the leverages to switch towards a circular economy. Would it be financial? Would it be regulatory? Its contribution from the industry is key in every piece of EU legislation. You really have a voice there. So if we go more into details, what does it mean, all those pieces of regulations? Well, when it comes to textiles, by 2030, the ambition is that all textiles shall be produced in respect of social rights and the environment. There are 5 key topics, if I summarize the different regulations. The first one is about setting binding product-specific eco-design requirements. So the regulation will tell you how to increase textiles performances in terms of durability, reusability, repairability, fiber-to-fiber recyclability, and mandatory recycled fiber content. So you might have to face very soon some targets, for instance, of to integrate recycled fibers into the clothes you produce. Another key topic of this regulation relates with safety. So there will be new safety requirements. You already have to comply with many of them, but it will go one step beyond, and The idea is really to substitute or minimize substances of concerns. So this is part of the chemical strategy, and so far there are no specific details, but that's going to be brought in the discussions. Another topic, key topic of those regulations covers consumers' information. Because the idea here is really to empower consumers to make conscious choices, to give them a chance, if they want to consume more in a more sustainable way, to be able to do so. And on the other side, they also want to protect consumers especially from false green claims. And so they want to increase reliability, comparability, and verifiability of environmental claims. And they will ask the industry to use, wherever it is relevant and possible, the processes which already exist today, like LCS for textiles, PEF for textiles, knowing that the PEF for textiles and footwear will be reviewed by 2024. The fourth topic for those regulations is about EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility. I don't know whether you all know what EPR is, but basically EPR, it's, well, schematically, if I take the example of a beverage, let's say I'm going to drink a bottle of water. When I finish this bottle of water, I'm supposed to put it into a bin because I am the polluter otherwise. I have produced the pollution, so I'm in charge of discarding it properly. Extended producer responsibility says that basically we as consumers cannot bear the whole weight of this responsibility. It should be shared together with the producer of this bottle of water. So that's how we created extended producer responsibility, because the producer of the bottle of water and myself, we are together responsible to deal properly with this waste. And when it comes to textiles, it means that you will have such an obligation to finance a system. Usually it's an eco-organism, a system which will help you eco-design what you put on the market, increasing reuse, recycling, closed-loop systems. In some cases, maybe you will, because you do well, you will have bonuses and pay less, and in some other occasion, because it cannot be recycled, although there is an alternative on the market, you will have to pay penalties, so it will be more expensive. And at the end of the day, you will anyway have to finance the whole system to collect, sort, and recycle everything you put on the market. So the regulation, the EU regulation, which is coming now, is going to make EPR mandatory. We already have it in France. It was one of the very first ones. So if you're interested, we can later discuss on how it works in France. But of course, as producers responsible under EPR, you will be totally part of the discussions on how it should work, at which level it should be financed and everything, but still you will have to take the lead on that one to make sure that you don't overpay and that, that you totally control the process. Finally, the fifth topic dealt with under all those regulations is a ban. There will be a ban on destruction or of unsold or returned textiles. So I don't know in other countries. I know in France there was lots of destructions, and now we have such a ban, and companies can choose between claiming it back, donating it, or recycling it. But they cannot anymore destroy any overproduction. So this leads to a transparency obligation so far in the EU regulation for large companies to publicly disclose the number of products discarded and destroyed and the further treatment. It's not only about saying, okay, I have, I don't know, 2 pairs of shoes which I had to discard and destroy, but you also have to say, no, in fact, I'm going to deal with it and maybe send it to a second-hand shop or maybe donate it or recycle it. So there are still some more measures, I'm afraid. So those are supportive measures. Some are new, some are just measures already existing but which are under review to be updated. And some of them are being dealt with right now, and some others will be part of working group very soon. So very briefly, there is a big topic in the strategy which concerns the increase of the protection of workers exposed to hazardous substances. We don't know much more yet, but this will be a topic. There is also a further piece of corporate sustainable due diligence legislation, which will introduce a horizontal due diligence obligation for companies to address and account for actual and potential adverse impacts on human rights, including labor rights and the environment in companies' own operations and in their global value chain. That was a very long sentence, sorry for that. And it will be completed by a ban on products made by forced labor. So this will be part of the aspect which the regulation will ask you to be transparent on and which will be controlled. Interestingly, there will be a work on what we call end-of-waste status for clothing, cellulosic fibers, and mixed fibers. End-of-waste status, what is this? I mean, it's a strange name, maybe. Well, basically, it's to make easier to use recycled content. Because when there is no regulation yet on some type of waste, like textiles, for instance, it will be considered as a waste. And if you export it from one country, if you export it, then you have to pay special taxes, do extra administrative burden and kind of things to be allowed to transport waste, because it's very strictly regulated. So the idea here is to fix set conditions under which clothing, cellulosic fibers, and mixed fibers will not be waste anymore, but will become again products which can be used as integrated as recycled content. There will be also some guidelines on circular business models by 2024, and finally, some mandatory eco-design criteria for green public procurement. So this will be more about professional clothes, like for firemen, kind of things. So on the side, but still to watch, just in case you could have some spilling over effects. So the agenda. So what's going to happen next is that the EU Commission is going to make a proposal to revise the Waste Framework Directive next May. That's where the Commission will introduce the extended producer responsibility for fashion, and it will be mandatory all over the EU, in every country. Given that we already have such a scheme in France, you should really check out what's happening there, because usually that's what happens also with packaging. It can really largely inspire the EU on what to do and how to deal with this EPR, which is new basically at the EU level. During the second semester, the EU Parliament will vote on the EU strategy for sustainable textiles, so it will validate or not, or maybe amend slightly the strategy I've just shared with you. During the fourth semester, it's a mistake, the EU's commissions will make a proposal to revise REACH. So REACH will be addressing the presence of around 60 hazardous substances used in textiles, like in fabric dyes and finishing products. So you could be directly impacted. And just for your information, REACH was supposed to be revised now, and there was a big fight between the industry and the Commission. So they managed to get a report of almost a year. But this is a very tense topic at the EU level, so Commission might be less open to suggestion when it comes to this topic, because they really wanted to deal with it urgently. Finally, end of 2023, the EU's Commission will make a proposal for the revision of the regulation on textile labeling and fiber composition. So it should introduce clearer labeling on textiles, or even a new European eco-label. And it should also deal with what we call the digital product passport, which you may have heard of, which will be a passport like for you and me and for each of your products, and in which everyone will be in capacity to find any type of information needed, that be consumers to know how to wash it, how to take care of it, kind of thing, or whether it can be, fixed somewhere. And other players in your value chain, if they are interested in getting back for, recycling kind of thing. So any types of information, including hazardous substances, everything. And there are some other regulations tabled. You've heard of the green taxonomy. So far, you are not directly concerned, but the EU Commission will adopt some what we call delegated acts, meaning that the EU Commission can make regulation on her own without consulting the Parliament or the Council. And she will do so to cover because so far there is only one of the taxonomy objective which is covered, to cover the other ones, which are pollution, water, circular economy, and biodiversity. And textile will at least be in the circular economy topic. So you will have to watch for that. This is expected for January, but it's not sure. So it's not, green taxonomy, of course, it's a burden for large companies which have to report according to those objectives and everything. But it's very interesting as well because it can also trigger new financing, that be private or public, because having a better picture of who is doing what and to which proportion can trigger some public funds at EU level to help your industry to really make this switch towards circular economy. So there is a good and there is a burdensome side to this regulation, but there is also a positive side potentially. Then I will be very quick on those ones. There will be also some new discussions on industrial emissions, pollutants, persisting pollutants, unintentionally released microplastics, which is your case when the case of your industry when we wash our jumper and it releases microfibers. This is not something you wanted. Versus intentionally release microplastics from cosmetics, like if you use some scrub for your face, in which there are some very small pieces of, any kind of products. This goes into the water pipes and then into the ocean. So there is specific regulation for cosmetics, and there will be one as well for unintentionally released microplastics. And weirdly enough, there are two main sectors concerned, fashion and tires. Because when you drive your car, your tires are releasing microplastic. Of course, this is unintentional, so this will be covered together in this regulation. There will be another important piece of regulation on consumers' right to really, as I said earlier, empower them, protect them, and really give them the power to make the right choice, if I may say, when it comes to sustainability. And finally, you also have to keep in mind that there is an international treaty which is being negotiated right now on plastics at large. So you could be impacted by this treaty. It will be a first, because this won't be soft law, but it will be a binding treaty, making obligations to all the states signing it. And so far, at the UN, it was 175 countries saying yes for starting such a negotiation on an international treaty. So microplastics, which you have here, could also be dealt with there, but of course any other types of plastics which you may use. So in summary, because this is a lot of regulation, and I've not even gone into the details of those. But if you have to remember something, what are those regulations asking you? Basically, they're asking you to eco-design, to trust everything you do, where you source your material, where it goes, everything, and to be totally transparent, that be towards consumers, towards regulators, towards other value chain actors. Eco-design, because up to 80% of the environmental impact of a product is determined at the design phase. So this is really key. And half of total greenhouse gas emissions and more than 80% of biodiversity loss and water stress come from extracting and processing resources. So this is something which has really to be limited. And maybe something which is missing on this slide is that maybe before eco-design I should have said reduce. But I believe that in your field, when it comes to luxury, it's already about scarcity. So maybe you don't have the same issue as the fast fashion has, which is to overproduce and discard tons of valuable materials after having extracted them from the soils. So maybe reduction could be one to keep in mind. But still here, it's really about eco-designing, and what we don't want anymore, what the regulators don't want anymore, is this, which is an open loop. As you can see, here it's the example of, I guess, a short, which is becoming a ping-pong racket. We don't want that, because if you extract petrol to produce this, it's lots of energy and water use. So the best thing you can do is to do a new short with it, because this you can do with a lower value material. So what is looked for under those regulations is really a closed loop, so close becoming close again. Traceability and transparency, well, as I said, it's needed all along the value chain. Today, it's something which is very much needed, because if you don't have this, you cannot sort things and you cannot recycle them at their end of life. Today, 62% of textile is labeled wrongly. So that's really the beginning. If you really want to build on some circular economy, even for the treatment of the waste your product may become one day, you need to know everything which is happening before, what type of fabric, what type of, are there any hazardous substances, that kind of information. Otherwise, you cannot set up any viable recycling industry or even reuse industry. You never know. So, and in terms of transparency, here I've shared two examples of what we're going to have in France. So it's a type of impact score for clothes as well. And the other one is really about the identity, but that's something which you will have again in the product passport. Like, for instance, here they explain in which country what has been done. And so that's really how you, pieces by pieces, you create, you enhance your value chain. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for all this valuable information that will drastically change any type of business in the fashion and luxury industry in the next coming months. I would like to give the opportunity to the audience to ask some questions to Alexandra. I mean, she's an expert of regulation, so if you want to better understand a couple of things, it's, she's here for you. So let me give you a mic, if you don't mind. All good. I get used now. Yeah. Hold on. Yeah.
Thank you.
No.
Now, can you hear me?
Mic one, please.
Hello. No,
Yeah.
it's working. It's okay. It's not so much a question. It's just maybe making a link to some of the product that we've seen. So, for example, the REACH regulations, it's gonna have an impact quite strong on the strap of the watch because it's using REACH product to a certain extent. So maybe the way we craft straps can no longer be the way we used to do it with the change, with the new regulation. And maybe one thing that we need to have in mind is that the fashion is leading the way in terms of change. So the product environmental footprint, it's really not easy to implement and calculated. But it is likely for jewelry and watchmaking sectors that it will come in a 2 years' time. And that's a lot of discussions about how it's calculated, what are the assumptions, how do you measure, for example, recycled gold compared to virgin gold? Do you take one share of the impact of the virgin gold or not? And all the discussions that are very technical. They're gonna have to be the norms for everyone if we have to all measure, publish the impact of our product on the environment. So sometimes it's exciting, but it's also a very technical discussion, and it's moving fast, and it's gonna have a huge impact on the material that we're using. For example, there are lobbying at that time that is happening in the fashion sectors, where the of the petroleum derivative sectors are lobbying because so far natural fibers might have a bigger impact than petroleum-based products in the existing framework of this. And the second thing that luxury groups are fighting against, it's that the sustainability of the product in itself and the emotional sustainability are not taken into consideration in the actual version of the product environmental footprints. So sorry for the digressions, and I just would like to thank you, Alexandra, because it's not an easy topic, and what you gave to us is really something that is worth a lot, because
My
it's
pleasure.
really tough to synthesize all this work that is changing currently the way we do fashion.
Thank you very much, Céline. I think there is another question here. Please.
Hi, Alexandra. Thank you so much for everything. I think one of the questions that just kind of kept coming to mind when I was seeing all of the different regulations coming and how they're impacting some of the brands is mainly what this means for the end consumer in terms of price. Like, how does this? I mean, I guess that would be my question. Like, what is your opinion on how this is affecting the end consumer in terms of pricing for these items?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're sorry. Yeah, it's a very good question. And yes, that's something I've not mentioned. But when you go through the EU textile strategy, they always say that it should be viable, you know, for the end consumer, meaning that what you have to understand by viable in this strategy is that it could be more expensive, but if it lasts longer, you know, there's kind of balance. So the idea is really and it's the same motto behind packaging regulations. You know, it's about stopping single use. It's not that fast fashion is single use, but almost. So the idea is really to kill that and to really promote more valuable things and to take better care of the things we have as well. So of course it can have a price, but the EU Commission is also ready to support financially many initiatives, research and development, and to open many funds to really allow this switch towards a more circular economy and to make it viable for everyone, because fashion industry is huge in the EU, and it's more than 1,500,000 jobs. So, you know, of course, they will be very careful and attentive to that. Because if consumers, and it's also about making consumers get the message, And that was also one of the interesting sentences of the first circular economy package a few years ago in 2012, saying that, well, you've been doing marketing so that people could buy, consume, throw. Now you're going to do marketing for people to buy and keep the things, take care of them, and reverse the logic. So it's also, it can only work if consumers understand as well, of course.
Any additional questions? Otherwise, we will close this session by thanking again and a big applause for
Thank you.
Alexandra.
Thank you for
Thanks
your
for
attention.
coming.